Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Manny Rodriguez along with Lindsey Wellman, and we're proud to bring you another parent training video.
So today, the topic that we're going to be going over is developmental expectations, toddler tantrums, teen attitudes, and more. So one thing about behaviors that we see, both just as parents and clinically, is there is a spectrum of behaviors, just like there's an autism spectrum. And some behaviors fall under the typical, fall under what would be considered typical or developmentally appropriate, despite them being frustrating as a parent, despite them being frustrating as a clinician. So today we're going to go over some areas that we might see in our children, behaviors that we might see, and we're going to talk about what is considered typical, when you should seek more guidance or more help from your pediatrician, your BCBA, your psychologist, and some things that you can do in the meantime to help curb some of these behaviors. So the first one that we're going to start with is the big one, tantrums. Now, every parent has experienced tantrums. Every person that has worked with children has experienced tantrums. Tantrums are a developmentally appropriate part of childhood, however frustrating they might be. However, there are times when we need to seek more assistance when we're seeing these tantrums. So there's a couple of things that we like to look for when we're seeing tantrums. Are these tantrums severe? Are they, laying on the floor, kicking, screaming? Okay. But are they starting to bang their head a lot? Are they starting to hurt other people? Are they starting to cause damage to property? That's when we start to have more concerns. Are these tantrums lasting long periods of time? 5-10 minutes maybe, but are they lasting an hour? That's when we need more help. If they're occurring multiple times a day, or if they're occurring regularly in a child over the age of 5. So the key word here is regularly, because kids over the age of 5 still have tantrums from time to time. But if they're happening every day, every week, that's when we start to be concerned and seek guidance.
Yeah, another thing about tantrums that I always look for as well is the child able to eventually self-regulate? Mm-hmm. So a lot of children, again, whether it's autism or not, have difficulties self-regulating. So the tantrum just carries on and on. Their bodies start to shiver. They're literally sweating. They're perseverating. They're grinding their teeth. It just it exacerbates and elevates and escalates into other things than just a simple tantrum. Now, how do you know the difference? Well, as a parent, you know your child well enough to know the difference between just a big old whining, crying fit versus this inability to maintain control. And that's what self-regulation is all about. So I'm going to pick on my little Junior. Junior, when he has a tantrum, especially at night, when we say goodnight, he doesn't like to say goodnight. He doesn't want to go to bed. He wants to play, or he wants another drink of water, or he wants a piece of crepe, or he wants a big old hug for the 10th time. So we do all these things to try to just get him to calm down, but some nights are harder than others, and some people have experienced this. And what we find is we'll walk away, we'll do some of the basic ABA procedures to get the tantrum to just self-regulate and dissipate. But you walk away and sometimes Junior ain't having it. And it goes on and on and on. And it gets to the point where your parental heart starts to break. And you say, okay, something's not right. And that's where that severity level that Lindsey was talking about, to me, hits home. Is that if the child can't self-regulate after a certain period of time, something else might be going on. Developmentally, they're just not ready to self-regulate from a tantrum.
So the next area that we'd like to focus on is attention. That's a common thing that parents come in, my kid cannot focus. My kid doesn't sit down. My kid is always going. They look like they're driven by a motor. So we want to look at what is an appropriate level of attention. The rule of thumb with attention is that a child should be able to attend for 2 to 5 minutes per year of age. So what does that mean? It means a 2-year-old maybe
4 to 10 minutes.
4 to 10 minutes. I can't do math. You're going to have to do math for me. A 3-year-old, 6 to 15
minutes.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, think about that as adults. How long can our attention be held? For some of us, that when we're working, we're sitting in front of computers, we're working with colleagues. Our attention span is a lot longer than just a few minutes, right? Now, for a child though, especially a child that struggles with attention or focus, that's where we start to look at, are they in a developmental level that they should be or typically are, or are they having some struggles?
And the interesting thing about this rule of thumb here is there's really not a lot of research surrounding it. So this is kind of the rule of thumb that you'll read on the ABA blogs, on the parenting blogs, in the textbooks. But when you really dig into it, there's not a lot of validated studies showing where this number came from, which tells me that it can vary wildly depending on the child, even if the child is neurotypical. Just like there are individual differences in adults, just like there are individual differences with kids on the spectrum, there are individual differences with kids that are neurotypical. So a child that cannot attend or has trouble attending does not automatically mean that they have some sort of diagnosis. It absolutely could, and it's a good area to look into. And that's why we have that rule of thumb, is to kind of say, my 5-year-old can only focus for about 30 seconds. Maybe that's something to look into. But, my 2-year-old can only focus for 4 minutes. Well, they're right on track. One area that does have a little bit more research behind it is the quality of attention and the type of task. So research has shown that when a task is more interesting, people are able to attend more. And that's across the lifespan, across abilities, kids and adults. And, that seems pretty basic. But when we think about it, when we're at school, we're asking kids to attend to tasks that aren't necessarily interesting to them for long periods of time. We all know about that kid that, can only focus on a worksheet for a minute, but can play video games for hours. And that has to do with the quality or the interest in the task that they're doing.
Yeah, I think we see a lot of this with even older kids, that we find they do good at math, but not good in reading or writing, right? Because that stimulus is not as entertaining, it's not as exciting, it's not as stimulating to the brain. Some that are really good at math, they love numbers, they love logic, they love all of those things. So they can attend to their math equations for hours. My son Aiden is just like that. But if you give Aiden a book to read, even a chapter to read from a book, his reading comprehension skills have never been the strongest for him. He's gotten better over the years, but it's just not that, as he puts it, entertaining. So, but you put my son Aiden in front of a video game, especially some of the more popular ones these days, he can tell you everything about them. He can tell you all the characters. He can tell you how to change the characters, all the plays, and so on and so on. So I love that we talked about the task relevance to this, because when it comes to attention behavior, if they are struggling, what are they actually struggling in is a really important factor in understanding whether it's a problem or is just something that needs more attention.
Absolutely. So let's look at when we should be concerned, when we should seek more help. Well, it's when it's less than those 2 to 5 minutes that we talked about, or if they're having trouble attending to things that they find interesting. So we work with a lot of kids that just go from task to task to task to task, even though they're tasks that they enjoy. So maybe I'm playing with the trains, and then I go get a ball, and then I go back to the trains, and then I go draw, and it's just one after the other. And they're not able to sustain their attention on any one thing, despite it being interesting. So that's when we start to say, there's something going on here. Maybe we can build that skill. Now,
so think about that kid with video games, electronics, things like that. Those of us that have kids at home or work with kids at schools or clinics, we see this all the time. A child that loves their tablet, loves their electronics. But when does attention become a problem is when they're not actually attending to anything on that tablet. What they're really doing is they're looking at something and they're scrolling and they're scrolling and they're scrolling and they're scrolling. Now we have something that we would say is more sensory related than actually something that they are attending to. So they're not actually attending to anything. They're actually only stimulated by the constant motion. And that would be some indicator of whether it's a worksheet or a coloring page or Legos or a tablet. If they can't literally focus on the task, then we might want to talk about strategies on how to improve that.
Absolutely. So how do we build that attention? We've talked in previous parent trainings about shaping, and I want to bring that back in. So in shaping, you're reinforcing closer approximations to a goal. So let's say your child is 2, you want them to attend for 4 minutes to playing with a toy, but right now they only attend for 10 seconds. Well, we're going to build them up when they do that 10 seconds. Whoa, you played 10 seconds with those Legos? That's awesome. Here's another really cool thing that you like. And then we're going to build it up. Then it's 15 seconds. Whoa, you did so well with those Legos for 15 seconds. Here's this other really cool thing that you like. And so on and so forth until we build up to that 4 minutes. There is a concept in ABA called a motivating operation. And there are 2 areas of motivating operations: deprivation and satiation. Deprivation is, oh, I haven't had this thing in a really, really long time. I really want it. Satiation, I've had a ton of this thing. I don't want it anymore. So we think, oh, I haven't had a drink in 3 hours. I'm so thirsty. I want a drink. That makes the drink a lot more valuable. Versus, oh, I just had a gallon of water. I could not take another drink if I tried. And so one thing that we can do to build attention to a task as well is to remove that task for a period of time. So if you don't have access to the iPad for a day, and then you get access to the iPad, you're going to spend more time on it because you haven't had it. If you don't have access to the Legos for a day, maybe you're going to spend 20 seconds instead of 10 seconds. And so we can remove those items temporarily to try to build that attention in the long term.
What we're going to talk about is aggression. Now, if you have a kiddo, whether it's one that you work with or a child of your own, there is some aggression that is perfectly normal. It's perfectly age appropriate. Now, you want to understand what that looks like, right? So a simple nudge from one sibling to another. Or my sisters, and yes, I used to have hair, loved to pull my hair as a child. They can't do that anymore, but they used to do it. And we were siblings, sibling rivalry, that was kind of a norm, whatever, no problem. But when does it actually become a problem? So let's talk about kind of what we see. Usually we see a peak somewhere between toddlers and preschoolers, right? So at some point, aggression becomes almost a choice. They learn to be aggressive to gain access to something or to escape and avoid something. And so then it becomes a bit of a problem, right? So if you're a parent with a preschooler or someone that went to daycare, a child that went to daycare, I myself have had those phone calls where Junior got a little rough with another child. What happened? And you start going down that rabbit hole of what happened. And sure enough, it sounded like a little bit more than just rivalry. It became more of a access to something or escape from something. And so those are the times where it becomes a little bit more problematic.
So what are some times when we should seek additional help for aggression? If we are observing aggression occurring in a child that's school age, so 6 or 7, similar to tantrums, there's an age limit where it no longer becomes developmentally appropriate and becomes more of a concern. Now, this is another area where we need to look at, is it occurring regularly? And the context in which it's occurring. Like Manny mentioned, sometimes there tends to be more aggression between siblings. But if they're going to school and they're pushing a friend to try to get a toy, then we're looking at a more concerning behavior. Or if they're aggressing on their siblings at a high frequency, or anyone at a high frequency. So high frequency is multiple times a day to multiple times a week in toddlers. I would say really more than once every couple of months for an older child. And even that would be concerning once they reach a certain age. It also becomes a concern when it is interfering with daily life. So if every time you go to change your toddler's diaper, they're kicking you in the face, well, now that's a concern because that's interfering with their daily life. That's interfering with their hygiene. And so we want to take those into consideration. So we've looked at what appropriate aggression is, what inappropriate aggression is, when to seek help. The next thing is, what do we do about it?
One of the other important aspects of aggression, right? So we talked about school age, high frequency, interfering with daily life. But one thing that I don't think can be has to be underscored, bolded, has to be talked about is severity. Some kids, they push, little light push, little nudge. Then we have kids that maybe they tug on someone's hair or they do a little minor kick or something like that. But then we have the other kids, even adults, where one parent not too long ago just told me that her kid has a wicked haymaker, right? Big old right hook. And they weren't lying. It was a good right hook. I felt it. And even your own kids, if the severity level is so intense, so high, where it could lead to injury of someone else, it could leave permanent damage, right? Or think of an adult hitting another adult, that could lead to incarceration, right? These are high severity physical aggression, and they are not to be taken very lightly. Some children that don't have a lot of self-control with these high severe behaviors, they may need much more intensive intervention. So that's something to keep in mind. If that's your situation, give us a call, send us an email. We want to talk to you and help you out with this. But that is definitely something else to think about.
Mm-hmm. So what can we do when we are seeing these aggressive behaviors? There's a concept in ABA called functionally equivalent replacement behaviors. So every behavior has a function, and we're not going to get too much into detail there, but the main point of that is, why are they doing the aggression? There's always a reason, even if it's not super apparent right away. So the reason could be, hey, I want that toy. I'm going to punch you so that I can take that out of your hands. Then we have to teach a behavior that has the same consequence. So we're teaching a behavior that still gets them that toy. So maybe it's, hey, can I have the toy, please? And we're teaching them that behavior of asking for it has the same consequence as punching somebody in the face. And that's a way more appropriate behavior. That's going to give you a lot more success in life than every time you want something, punching someone in the face. Another one that we see frequently is aggression that's maintained by attention. So, hey, mom's doing something over here. I'm going to pull her hair so hard that she has to talk to me. Instead of teaching tapping on the shoulder, teaching wait, and then I'll give you attention. Teaching those skills that have the same outcome, but are more socially acceptable.
I can't say it better myself. That was a great summary. Functionally equivalent replacement behaviors. Identify them, reinforce them, goes a long way to solving these kind of problems.
So there are a couple of other behaviors that I wanted to touch on, but not spend quite as much focus as we did on those big ones. So those areas are arguing, following directions, and self-injurious behavior. I want to start with self-injurious behavior because that is the one that, people find the most concerning. And it is a very concerning behavior, but there are actually times when it is developmentally appropriate, as minimal as those are. So if it is happening very infrequently, the one that we'll see from time to time with very, very young children is head banging. If they're frustrated and they bang their head at a low intensity and a low frequency, that is actually developmentally appropriate. Now, if a child is slamming their head on the floor, if it's happening in an older child or an adult, that's when we need to be concerned and that's when we need to seek help.
Yeah, I think with self-injurious behavior, that's a whole nother parent training all in of itself one day. But if you are concerned about self-injurious behavior, consult a pediatrician, consult a psychologist, consult a BCBA, because there is ways to help. But also understand that not all self-injurious behavior is equal to each other.
Absolutely. Another area is following directions. So you have a 4-year-old. You ask them to do something, they act like they don't hear you. That's typical. Now, when we start to be concerned is when it's consistent. And then we're going to look at all of the areas. We're not going to just take this as a behavioral concern immediately. We're going to check their hearing. We're going to even check their vision, because if you're doing this and trying to get their attention, maybe they're not seeing you well. So in looking into all of these things to do this presentation, one thing that I found, and it was really interesting to see, is there is no hard and fast rule. And that's something that Dr. Manny and I have talked about as well, is it's important to trust your parent gut. It's important to trust the professionals around you, your teachers, your pediatricians, who see a lot of kids at the same age that your child is, because they can see those norms. And it's important to ask questions when you have concerns, but to know that some not following directions is very, very normal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And the last one that I wanted to focus on is arguing. We all know the child that talks back, the child that says, "No, I didn't do that," when you clearly watched them do that. That is another area that can be completely typical and developmentally appropriate. The times that we need to look into more is just like we talked about the other areas: frequency, intensity, and duration. How often is it happening? How long is it happening? And how intense is it? And those are kind of your key indicators. Maybe this is something else going on here. Maybe we need to consult the professionals.
Yeah, and I think there is always room for some healthy arguing, especially with kids. My 18-year-old is a great arguer, but we also call it debating. Let's have a debate, let's have a discussion. But it becomes a problem if the argument leads to other things. So if you have a little kiddo, sometimes the arguing leads to some property destruction or some aggression. And so that's something else to keep in mind is the arguing behavior leading and escalating to other problematic behaviors. Yeah.
So I think that is all we have for today. So a couple of key points to remember. We discussed shaping, we discussed functionally equivalent replacement behaviors, and we discussed times when we need to seek help. And those times are when a behavior is happening very frequently, the behavior is happening at a high intensity, or the behavior is happening for a long duration. So thank you so much for joining us for the parent training. Have a great day.